Okay, hello, good morning. Welcome to the last week of our summer intensive course. And I believe you've been having a productive summer taking this course, exposed to new scholarship on Asian cinema, and connected with amazing scholars in the field. Today we have Professor Chun Jin-seo, and Professor Chun is Assistant Professor of Center for Foreign Language Education at Yuhan University. Before coming to Yuhan, he taught at Korean National University of Arts, Seogang University, and University of Santa Cruz, where he received his PhD in literature. He specialized in world cinema, critical theory, post-colonial studies, British and American literature, urban narratives, and Asian American literature. His selected publications include Orientalism's Discourse, Said, Foucault and the Anxiety of Influence, and Happy Soul for Foreigners, I like the title, Scenes from Multicultural Life in South Korea. Please welcome Professor Jin.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. Okay. Are you going to stick around? Okay.
This is
Thank you for the introduction.
See you around.
Okay. All right, so for our seminar this morning, I'd like to consider two topics, Korea's modernization and globalization, and discuss how they are central to understanding what is often described as the new Korean cinema, and more specifically the work of filmmakers like Park Chan-wook and Bong Joon-ho. So, I figured we'd watch, or talk about the films of Bong Joon-ho. He happens to be a Yeondae alumni, so I will make a few introductory remarks in order to set up our discussion of Rob Wilson's essay, Killer Capitalism on the Pacific Rim, which I'd like to discuss together in more detail. And the two films I assigned for our seminar, The Host, Kwemu, and Memories of Murder, right? And I'm going to ask you what you think of his use of the word chuok. Why do you think he uses that word, which is kind of like, I guess, a little ironic in the title. So I want to talk about these films and talk about how they raise a number of interesting questions about Korea and its place in the world today. A question that is not only cultural, but also military, political, and economic. The same also applies for the films analyzed in Rob Wilson's essay, which I will use today as a launching point for our discussion of Korean cinema, and more specifically the work of Bong Joon-ho, whose films also can be described as operating in the minor mode that Wilson describes in his essay. So the two topics, the first, the question of modernization. The question of modernization largely revolves around Korea's transition from a rural society to an urban one. Okay, so just consider the fact that from 1953, when the armistice for the Korean War was signed, to 2000, South Korea went from being 80% rural in terms of its composition to 80% urban. So this transformation has not only brought about a major change in the nation's economy, right, which can today be described as quasi-post-industrial, but also its culture and mores, or values, which no longer revolve around village life, but is now centered around office buildings and apartments and things like that. So the other important aspect of the question of modernization involves the birth of democracy and the consequences of that in South Korea as well. So the question of globalization, or in Korea, it's they have the term 세계화, which is like, actually would be closer to saying like worldization. concerns Korea's place in the world today as global borders become more and more fluid and more Koreans become cosmopolitan in their tastes and practices. One way in which this question about Korea's status in the world is directly or indirectly addressed is through Korea's relationship with its neighboring countries in the Asian Pacific region and its military and political alliance with the United States, a key player in all matters related to the Pacific Rim, which I want to discuss in more detail. Rather than through military or economic might, Korea has largely asserted its global presence through popular culture, the so-called Korean wave, Hallyu, creating a soft power industry whose influence in the Asian Pacific region is only rivaled by the US and Japan, with China not far behind. All right. So do you understand this term soft power? It comes from the Harvard political scientist Joseph Nye, and he used it to describe how countries, did not have to rely on economic or military power to assert their authority in the world, that they could use culture and the influence of culture. And so if you take the example of the United States has not only been the number one military power in the world, but it's also been the number one cultural power as well. Right? So I just want to kind of use this introduction as a launching point for our discussion today. I don't want to hog up the conversation. I want to hear from you what you think of all of these things, and as well as all the issues raised in the reading. And if we have time, I'll get into a closer reading of the film, The Host. Okay, all right, and the geopolitical implications of that film. All right. So, any questions so far? Okay. So why don't we get into begin with a discussion of Rob Wilson's article, Killer Capitalism on the Pacific Rim. Right. So I want to see if you have if there's anything that any questions that you have about this article, or anything that you're not sure about, or anything that provoked your mind in any way. Anything? From what I was told, this is supposed to be a discussion class, right? So, all right.
Just a sec, I think once.
Okay.
If we can skim through the article one more time.
No problem, take your time. So the term killer capitalism that he uses, you can almost associate with what you were telling me you read Frederick Jameson last week, what he calls late capitalism, right? A development of late capitalism, and many scholars use the term neoliberalism to describe the same thing, right? So we see example of this today, even in the battle that Greece is undergoing right now with the EU and more specifically Angela Merkel of Germany, to try to pay off their debts. So the article begins with the discussion of the Pacific Rim, and are you familiar with the term Pacific Rim? Why? So this is a term that came out of the emerged in the late 70s, 80s as you know, especially as the Asian tiger countries are becoming more and more powerful. So the Asian tiger economies refers to South Korea, of course, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong, right, before the handover to China. So the term Pacific Rim has its own discourse associated with it, this specific style of conversation, right? So he says at the bottom of the first page, he says, this contemporary geo-imaginary space still evokes a kind of vaguely utopic global destiny, right? Led by the United States, to be sure. Right? So he uses the term geo-imaginary space. So one way to think about Korea and its relationship with its Asia-Pacific neighbors, including China especially, but also Japan, Taiwan, and other countries close by, is through this coalition of countries which we often group as the Pacific Rim, right? And you can also include Australia and New Zealand. So the term Asian is a very vague term if you think about it, right? And we use these terms as if they have like real borders, or as if they're real concepts, but they're largely imaginary concepts. So even the notion of a nation is a largely imaginary concept, right? There's nothing geographically or geologically that defines a nation. Nations are things that we pick a border, we pick a line and say this constitutes one nation, this constitutes another. That's really an imaginary construction, right? So. All right. So anyone have anything to chime in?
I thought it was really interesting because when I thought of Pacific Rim, I must admit I thought of the film, the Guillermo del Toro film, and maybe it's just me, but I don't think Korea at least the mainstream Korean media doesn't seem to emphasize this identity as much, and that the Pacific Rim, when we think of it, it's mostly associated with Japan.
Yeah.
So it was, as you said, it does seem to be its own kind of discourse, but this is actually the first time that I've encountered it.
Yeah. So it's one that's a very good point to make. It's one of the, I wouldn't say many, but there are competing discourses. There are competing ways of how to situate Korea's role within its region and within the global picture itself, right? So this would be one way. Yeah, I would say the concept of the Pacific Rim has largely been dominated by Japan, right? And that was especially because in the 80s, Japan was, a huge economic player. It's before Japan underwent a major recession, which it still has not yet recovered from, right? So he says, so secured with on page 116 in the bottom of the first paragraph. He says, so secured within this decentered empire, the Trans-Pacific would become a lived-in space of techno-creative newness, wherein all is in the mix, flow, and brash interface of mores and code. Pacific Rim, as a regional frame, still assumes some non-othering vocabulary, unity and commonality, purposeful interanimation aiming at a kind of metonymic equivalence taking place in the ever globalizing telos of commodity presencing. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I think a key word is this is non-othering, and this comes from the reference to Christopher Connery's article on Pacific Rim discourse. So what happened in the 80s, or one reason for the emergence of this Pacific Rim discourse is that there was a need to address the Asian countries and their coalition or their relationship to each other, and to do so, especially in the West, from a non-Orientalist point of view. So it's, non-othering means that, it's no longer the mysterious Far East. It's, something that, that's very much a part of the world, especially if you're living in the United States. So, as this Pacific Rim discourse was taking off, people were talking about, Japan buying up all this property in the United States, the dominance of Toyota over the automakers in Detroit and all these other things. So, how the presence of Asia was becoming more and more a greater part of the everyday life in the United States, and how you can no longer just distance yourself and just say that's the Far East, that's this other place that's not a part of us. Okay. All right. So we're gonna get to the film soon, but I just want to kind of lead you through what he's saying in this article and how he's going about it. Okay. So he then talks about Walt Whitman's poem, right? So he's saying the trans-Pacific dedication of America's global destiny to empire of unity and commonality in the region. So what he's really talking about here is just an extension of the notion of manifest destiny. Do you know this idea of manifest destiny? Is that the United States, United States started as 13 colonies in the eastern part of North America, right, and it expanded westward, and the kind of like the ideological justification for this is that the was what was called manifest destiny, that United States had like some mission to expand as far as it could, and this included not only going westward towards California and taking property away from the Native American population in Mexico, but also going into Latin America and eventually going into Asia, becoming a part of Asia as well, right? Which is why the United States has control over territories like Guam and other things. Okay. All right. So he's that's what he's getting at when he's talking about the Walt Whitman poem in this context. Okay. All right. Anything you want to say here? You have nothing to add? Was this a hard article to read for you?
Maybe some parts.
Some parts,
A little
okay.
bit theoretical. Some of the terms I think are.
Oh, okay, all right. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Okay, all right. I feel like you guys are trying to avoid looking at me. So I mean,
this notion of the Pacific Rim was initially a kind of identity created by the U.S.?
Yeah, it by the media and by academics, to talk about Asia in a different way.
Okay.
Yeah, to bring it into more of a contemporary context, especially as these new economies were emerging, and becoming major economic and even cultural players in the world. So. Anything else? All right. So I just want to give you some context about why he's talking about the Pacific Rim, right? So one of the things I want to talk about today is Korea coming into the global scene, all right? So and what effect this has had on its culture and how this is manifested or shown in its cultural production, especially in cinema, right? So on page 117, he makes a very interesting point here at the bottom paragraph. He says, "It is not enough to figure these modes of cultural production in Asia or on the Rim as perpetual latecomers, late modern derivatives, or bastardized mixtures in any sense. This booming and bustling soul of techno-glut and inter-Asian cultural glamour integrated with Japanese, Hong Kong, and American pop influences is a long way from those abjective war memories of Korea portrayed in an older generation poem by Yemun Park, say, where a sickly Korean soldier almost chokes with envy and contempt looking up at the well-being and exotic mores of American soldiers." So the first part here, he's saying, the new culture that emerges out of this as Korea becomes more and more integrated into the global scene, and its culture becomes kind of a big part of this equation, is that you cannot reduce especially Korean cinema to, you can't say it's merely a latecomer. It's merely like a imitation of a Hollywood product, right? It's something very different. It combines and mixes many different styles, including indigenous styles from Korea. But there's the influence of Japanese culture, all right? Whether or not Koreans want to admit it, all right? There's Hong Kong, especially Hong Kong cinema had a huge influence, right? So you can watch, there are some films that were made in the early 90s, and a good example of this would be, there's a film with Jang Dong-gun, I forget, it's about soul. It has soul in the title, in the name. I think it's called Holiday in Seoul or something like that. But if you watch that film, it's really trying to copy the style of cinema that came out of Hong Kong, So, but it was kind of, it's kind of an early product of trying to Korea trying to grapple with the Hong Kong influence. But by the time you get to the Park Chan-wook making Old Boy, you see something that's not merely derivative, but something that's really doing something very, very new or interesting with all these different influences, right? And of course, Old Boy is based on a Japanese manga, and things, there's that influence as well. All right. So, but the other point that he makes here is that, there's also been this shift, where, Korean culture, and the culture of the Republic of Korea, right? Since the formation of the Republic of Korea, right? It's largely been, for a long time it was, kind of concerned with realism, right? And and one of the main themes was the Korean War, and how South Korea is kind of haunted by the Korean War, and this was this realism and the Korean War, memories of the Korean War. This is what kind of dominated, what drove Korean culture for quite a long time, right? So it's kind of like what I call the MASH image of Korea. Do you know the American TV show MASH? Okay, so that was kind of like the dominant image of Korea in the West was you got it from MASH, that Korea was this kind of poor, war-torn country, right? So, and of course today, because of the influence of the Korean wave and the success of the various filmmakers and musicians like Psy, you get something very different. You get a very different image of Korea today, right? Okay. So before we start talking about films, is there anything you want to know about, or any comments you have about the first part of this article?
I didn't read this article before because I wasn't part of the class. But
Okay.
I just jumped in. I was wondering about why he mentions Rip Van Winkle from Sketchbook. And what that has to do with. I couldn't quite get the meaning of why he mentions it.
So he says all of this change on the post 9/11 Pacific Rim and a new culture of global local firmament is dominant in contemporary. So Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle, right, had his wife-fearing Dutchman drone wake from a brew-induced sleep 20 years later to find the American Revolution had happened. Hotels had sprung up, political parties came in, baffling the archaic loyalists, blah blah blah. Alright, so moving on. Rip's line, strange names were over the doors, strange faces at the window, everything was strange, speaks to these shocks of perpetual disruption, decentering, uncanny replacement back when America was the original of modernity and Europe is the dubbed or subtitle version. So he's quoting Jean Baudrillard. But rim modes of these cultural displacements and global interfaces, as in South Korea and our axis of evil to the north, can make the United States look like Van Winkle's Hudson River hamlet, despite its long-held and much challenged bases at the TMZ. So it's kind of like a comment on the United States at this time. So spring 2007, he's writing this, during the time when George W. Bush was still the president of the United States. And, no matter what your political views are, you have to remember that, Bush was a very, very divisive president. He was a very divisive figure, especially when it came to, Korea and, the presence of the military in the in the Asia Pacific. So he puts from what I get, it's merely a commentary that Washington is like this figure, it's like this it's kind of like asleep at the wheel, not paying attention to all these shifts going on outside. So whether or not this is true anymore, it's it's debatable, all right? So, all right, but one thing I think you cannot deny is that because of the policies of the Bush administration, the United States, the influence of the United States has, gone down, throughout the world, even in Korea, that, the USA as number one, that kind of motto is, no longer necessarily true, in many ways. And so this kind of decline of the U.S. is, the U.S. is still a dominant player. Still has a dominant role even in this part of the world, right? But it's kind of very, very high status has come down a little bit, right? Because of the policies that were undertaken, right? And of course, he says, he makes a nod to our axis of evil to North Korea, which was labeled as part of the axis of evil under the Bush administration. So Bush lumped Iraq, Iran, and North Korea together, and creating another weird geographical, geopolitical imaginary. Okay. All right. Okay. Anything else? No. All right. So let's get on with the discussion of cinema. All right. So he says, next part. All right. Killer capitalism on the rim. So let me, I'm gonna skip parts of this. So for a long time, Korean films had little presence in the global cinema market. So, they were largely unseen outside of Korea. So unlike Japanese films or Korean films were for a long time they were largely unknown. You could see some at festivals. I remember when I was an undergraduate, there was a film festival and they showed in context Sopyeonjae, which was kind of a rare event. Like it was very, very hard to see a movie like that back then. Okay, right? Especially one that's a very, very Korean film because it's about pansori singers. And so, have you seen the film? Okay, so and he talks about Im Kwon-taek here, who's part of a different generation of filmmakers than Park Chan-wook and Bong Joon-ho. Im Kwon-taek is part of what's called the Korean New Wave, and that also includes other filmmakers like I wrote down some other filmmakers who are part of the Korean New Wave. I have it somewhere. All right. Well, anyways, Park Kwang-soo is another one, if you know his work. All right. Okay. So he talks about this concept of film with legs, films, traveling around the world, being seen by international audiences. Okay, so this starts to happen in the, you start to see, after 2000, Korean films starting to have some presence on the international scene, right? So, and he says, Old Boy, and the second film in Park Chan-wook's Revenge trilogy. So Old Boy is this, part of this Revenge trilogy. Have you seen all the films in the, in the Vengeance trilogy? The first one is called Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, or Boksuno Naoigo. And the third one is sympathy for Lady Vengeance, or what?
친절한 문제.
Yeah, Kundashi. So that's part of the trilogy, right? All right. So he says other lesser Korean film works, and he mentions Phylon here, which you saw in this class, and Waikiki Brothers, right? And Take Care of My Cat. And Waikiki Brothers, both Waikiki Brothers and Take Care of My Cat were directed by female directors, right? Might be considered global cinema wrought in the minor mode, meaning Korean films more expressive of minority angles of vision, socially occluded perspectives, and local voices, undeveloped characters, urban or rural hinterlands, drifting visual modes, narrative digressions, low-tech inscriptions of minor and marginal communities, and a more fully dialectical working of voice and angle of vision. Hence, these films would be less available to global consumption or to intermediate or immediate narrative recognition. All right. So let me ask you. Let's go over these. What he defines as minor cinema, and even though Korean films have more of a global presence, there's still there is still a minor presence in a way, and especially even these more lesser known films like Waikiki Brothers and Take Care of My Cat. Okay, so I think even in Korean there's a term like to kind of a pejorative term to describe a film as minor, right? If you say, oh, that film is minor, they use that as, I think some people have used that as a Konglish word to describe an unimportant film. Okay, all right. So so he says these films, and he would include Old Boy, are more expressive minority angles of vision. So, right. So you include different perspectives, socially occluded perspectives, and local voices. So let me ask you, do you see any of these things in the two films I asked you to watch today, The Host or Memories of Murder? Urban or rural hinterlands? I think you see that, right? Which film deals with that?
Memories of the Murder?
Yeah. So it's the whole film takes place in this very kind of small rural area, all right? Where I forget, where was it? It was in Hwasong, okay? All right. So, and you have the detective from Seoul, who's like this city presence, and also you have, I mean, the government in Seoul is, also makes its presence, known throughout the film, especially when they have to do military drills and things like that. When they're trying to capture the killer, a lot of the policemen have to go, put down demonstrations and things like that. All those orders are directly coming from Seoul. So, all right. So that would be, one example of that. Or even in The Host, you could think there's something about that family in The Host that they're like kind of like a rural family that's kind of like been put in this very busy city, and they're barely making it, they're barely getting by. Okay, so the character, the Kang-do, the Song Kang-ho character, he's like this almost like a country bumpkin who's like in living in Seoul. All right. What about all right? How are we doing on time? Okay. right? When do you normally take a break? After halfway? When we're halfway done, okay. All right. So narrative digressions, okay. So there's less of this in the host, but I think Memories of Murder. I think the main topic, it's not there is a plot in the film, but the film is like, you know, not really about the plot. It's really about all these things kind of happening every day. It's about, like, you know, how bored these characters are most of the time. They're trying to catch the serial killer, and it's about, you know, the everyday life of these detectives, you know, all these things that they experience. Okay, right? So you have that, and so the narrative kind of makes all these interesting turns and things like that. So I think there's a deliberate, you know, he's trying to show everything as very kind of mundane or boring. Even the, you know, even the sex scene in that movie is very boring. It's just like very everyday. It's like, you know, nothing special. Okay, you know, eating, beating people up. You know, it's all part of their everyday lives. Okay, all right. What about low-tech inscriptions of minor and marginal communities? You see anything like that? Or let me ask you, do these things apply to any of the other Korean films that you've seen in the course? So, because the reason why I'm asking you, I want you to, you know, understand what he's talking about by referring to a minor mode of cinema. Okay.
What exactly does he mean by low-tech inscriptions? Is it a direct reference to certain camera techniques, or just?
I think, yeah, just or how certain communities, very especially the who are poor, are not don't have access to technology. Okay, all right. Even in the host, there's the thing about the young girl. She really wants a phone and stuff, and these people barely survive. They're, you know, living in like a shack basically. Okay. So, and you know, the funny thing about the host is that even though it's this you know, monster movie with a lot of CGI effects, just there it kind of emphasizes for the characters, it emphasizes how they don't have much in terms of like material possessions, in terms of like they don't have advanced weapons, and they end up defeating the monster by using these in a very low-tech way, you know, by using the bow and arrow and the Molotov cocktail and things like that, you know. So it's kind of almost like an irony, I think. So he applies this. He says while the film festival circuit of international recognition and multiplex outlets necessitates all but inevitable imperatives to global circulation for any feature film these days, still minor modes of filmic creation suggest important differences films can use and amplify. And you have to remember that, you know, the global cinema market is still dominated by Hollywood, or, you know, and not, you know, you can include Hollywood as part of Hollywood, the films that come from the you know, even the films that come from the UK or New Zealand, you know, if you just say like, well, you know, The Hobbit is a film that's made in New Zealand, it's still a Hollywood film in many ways. All right. So, but and he mentions these other films to show how this minor mode work or can apply to other films from other countries, like, you know, Y Tu Mama Tambien, right? And he says the drifting camera mode. Have you seen that film, Y Tu Mama Tambien? So you remember the camera kind of like floats at times, you know, all right? Okay, and Once We're Warriors, all right? So talking, you know, which is about, you know, kind of like this minority culture within New Zealand, the Maori, okay, and Chungking Express, where intimacy happens only by coincidence, right? Such films depend on minor tactics to achieve a different angle of expression, however global their ultimate impact or circulation pattern might be, right? And, you know, you can also apply this to another film, which, you know, a more contemporary film, the Snowpiercer, or, you know, Sokuk Yocha, right? So, and as a film, if you compare how that film operates compared to a film like The Avengers or any of the comic book inspired films coming out of Hollywood these days, you know, so, you know, what Bong Joon-ho is doing in that film is very different from what you're seeing in the Marvel films or even in, you know, Christopher Nolan's Batman films. Okay. Right. By the way, if you're interested, there will be a discussion of that film on Friday. Okay. Right. Okay. So. Right. So then he goes on to talk about Im Kwan Taek, and he mentions the film Chiwa-san, but he says on page 120, he says, all right, so he's talking about Chiwa-san. He said, the painter in Im Kwan Taek's retelling rejects the self-denial of Asian traditions and the drive towards Western aesthetic standards under modernization, and instead would stay tied to Korean aesthetics and values. Im later will try to affirm in such period films on Korean art forms like Pansori Gayogum or Asian painting. So, I mean, Im Kwan Taek is an interesting example because he's a Korean filmmaker who's really trying to create, you know, he's trying to tell stories in a very Korean fashion. He wants to, you know, incorporate Korean cultural traditions into his movies. So, which is why his films are, you know, very, very foreign to Western audiences, I think, right? Especially, you know, you have a movie like Chunyangdo. Have you seen his version of Chunyangdo? Okay, so, you know, it starts with the Pansori singer because it's, you know, but, you know, if you watch the film, there's something, you know, very Korean about its aesthetics. Okay. Right. So, but, you know, as I said, Im Kwan Taek is from older tradition, you know, and so you have the new filmmakers who are really, they're also trying to preserve something very Korean about their style, but they're also bringing in all these other influences. And for a filmmaker like Bong Joon-ho, he's very, you know, influenced by all the genre movies that come from Hollywood cinema. But he's, you know, he doesn't merely imitate or replicate them. He does something different. He does his own thing with it, within those genres, right? Okay, so is this all clear to you? Is there anything that doesn't make any sense that you need clarification about? You guys are a quiet bunch. Okay. Alright. So, let me see. Anything? Alright. So, why don't we let me ask you to let's go around the room and see just tell me anything, what give me a comment about anything, any of the articles or the films or anything that we talked about in class, because I was told that this would be an American style graduate seminar, but I've never been in a seminar where the professor did so much talking. Okay, so I'd like to hear more from you. Okay. All right, so let's start here. Anything you want to contribute or say? Or tell me, what did you think? Had you seen the films before? Moon and you don't have anything to say about the film?
When you mentioned this low-tech inscription,
Yeah.
I thought about they didn't have any technology at
Yeah,
time,
yeah, yeah.
so they had to send over DNA
Yeah.
to states.
Yeah, there's that speech that Song Kang-ho gives to the other detective from Seoul. He's saying, like, why does the United States have the FBI? Because the United States is such a damn big country. It's so large, that they need the FBI, because like, how can you manage such a large country? But we here in 대한민국, our country, you can walk from Busan to Seoul on foot. You can travel on foot, if you had to. And it's not, why he's basically saying, why do we need you guys from Seoul to come here and tell us what to do? So, but yeah, and when they have to do something, like very technical, like get DNA, analyze the DNA sample, they have to send it abroad or do things like that. The film is kind of weirdly nostalgic in some ways too. So I mean that's why he uses 추억 instead of 기억 in the title, right? Because if you use the term 추억, it's like kind of like a fond memory, like a nostalgia, right? But what is so fond about thinking about murder? Is like all right, an interesting U.S. film that would be that would make a nice double bill with Memories of Murder would be the David Fincher film Zodiac. Have you seen that film, Zodiac? It's also about a serial killer that was in the 1970s in the Bay Area near San Francisco. But that's also kind of like a social examination of what was going on in America at that time. So But yeah. Okay. All right. Next.
I have some question. Is the third cinema means manner cinema?
Where is that?
It's on page 120. The second paragraph.
Okay, yeah. So he says the politics of minor cinema are carried not just by overt content, subject matter, or some kind of ideological didacticism, as in third cinema. Third cinema was a style of cinema, very political style. It's a very political style of cinema that came out of the 60s. Mainly, might have started earlier, but it's especially it's associated with filmmakers from the third world, okay, who are talking who are addressing political issues, economic issues in countries, especially related to development and military dictatorship and things like that. So there are films, third cinema films coming out of Africa, out of places like Brazil, right. So they were not only fighting against, kind of the dominant cinematic styles coming out of Hollywood, but they were also dealing with very, important political issues at home. So, but he's saying the politics of minor cinema are not didactic, meaning that they're not like, it's not just like, dealing directly with political issues. It's doing it more indirectly, okay? So, and he says, so how is it doing it indirectly? By altered formal modes of expression, situated voices, localized angles of expression, fragmentary plot threads, and dialectical overlays and scenic juxtapositions. The audience needs to do some interpretive work of minority affiliation and interpretation to grasp such local global forms, right? Why I think this is important is because to you, watching Korean films, you feel comfortable because you know the culture, right? It's or at least, yeah. I mean, if you lived in Korea long enough, you grasp a sense of the culture and you see it reflected in the film. You understand why the characters are behaving in the way that they are, all right? But to a Western audience, they need to do some cultural work. It's not, Korean films are not necessarily universal films always, right? So, and that's not a bad thing, because there are a lot of great films that are culturally specific, and that if you're looking at those films from outside the culture, you need to do some homework in order to understand it, right? That's really what it means to be, a cosmopolitan. You don't just assume that everything will be done so that a U.S. audience can understand it, right? So, I'll give you a good example of this is, if you know about the film Snowpiercer, and when the film was, the rights for the film in North America were bought by the Weinstein Company, which is run by Harvey Weinstein, who's like one of the big players in Hollywood. And he wanted to cut the film by over half. He wanted to cut half an hour out of the film, right? Why? Because he said, people living in Middle America are not going to understand the film unless you cut out these certain parts. All right. He wanted to make it more culturally palatable for, you know, he wanted to really dumb it down. I mean, how is he going to do this? He's going to cut out all the Korean dialogue, which is, there's hardly any Korean dialogue in the movie, right? And even when there is Korean dialogue, like Song Kang-ho and Go Ah-sung, you know, they're speaking in this translation device, and it comes out in English, so it's being translated anyways. So, I mean, he just wanted to cut out anything foreign from the film and make it more of like this kind of a streamlined Hollywood-style action film. All right. Okay. Next. Yeah.
I watched the movie, The Host, a long time ago. When I recently watched it on TV, I guess like things that I didn't notice kind of popped into my head, and also from reading the article too. But I thought, I guess continuing on with the discussion of the irony of like the weapons that we talked about, how ordinary they are. I think I noticed how we're so used to the heroes that are very like just hero-like, but then his character was so I guess not typical, and the whole family is so dysfunctional, and so I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's really, you know, the work of Bong Joon-ho. I mean, he wants to put ordinary people in that situation. And if you think about all of his films, they're all centered on these very plebeian, you know, ordinary, down-to-earth people, kind of like, you know, the host, is the you know, even like Mother, you know, which also takes place in the countryside, kind of, or this very rural area, or even, you know, Snowpiercer, which is about the, you know, 1% versus the 99% in this train, the poor people, you know. I mean, unlike a director like Im Sang-soo, who likes making films about how decadent the rich people are, you know, like who did the remake of Hanyo, the housemaid. You know, Bong Joon-ho really focuses on, you know, working class, or, you know, peasant people, right? So yeah, that's definitely, you know, Bong Joon-ho's style. The only film I can think of that where it's not so working class, or it's kind of lower middle class, is his first film, Flanders. You know, I don't know. It's called, the English title is Barking Dogs Always Bite, or something like that. Never Bite, and it's about this guy who has a PhD. He wants to become a professor, and he's living in this apartment building, and there's this dog that's annoying him. So I mean that's about as bourgeois as Bong Joon-ho gets in his characters. So, you know.
I think also like the monster usually appears at like a later time in the film, usually when it's like dark and everything, but then it just came out of nowhere, and it was daylight.
Yeah.
And so I think that was pretty like shocking, I guess.
Yeah.
It was so not typical.
Yeah, you know, busy day in Yoido Park, and, you know, like lots of people, you know, there, and like this monster appears. Yeah.
I think somehow that made it more scary.
Yeah,
the fact that it's so like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like daylight.
Yeah, and you know, it's like it doesn't discriminate in its taste. It'll take little children, it'll take adults and things like that. Yeah. So he's definitely playing around with the conventions of the genre of the monster movie, you know. And he's not only thinking, Bong Joon-ho in that movie, he's not only thinking about American monster movies, but he's also thinking about, you know, Japanese monster movies too, like Godzilla. You know, and if you've ever seen the first Godzilla film, and you know, I can talk about this in more detail, but Godzilla is really, or Gojira in Japanese, it's really a commentary on, you know, post-nuclear Japan, after Japan was, after the nuclear bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You know, that's where the inspiration for the film comes from. It's the nuclear bombing of Japan. So, but yeah, that's I think that's a good point. Yeah. Okay, next.
I watched The Host a long time ago, but I thought it was better than D-War, the other monster film.
Of course.
Yeah. And I was wondering why the Host came out in 2006, and why at that time there was a monster coming out.
Well, the other thing about The Host, and this, I mean, I would say it doesn't make the film outdated, but you know, you have to be aware of it, is that, you know, it came out during, again, like I mentioned, the Bush administration. It came out during that time, you know, like when, you know, Bush administration was, you know, really making the world very divisive, you know, and you're like you're on his side or the other side. Supposedly you're the enemy. So, and you know, not, I mean, like around 2002, around, was it 2002, 2001, there was a incident where 2 middle school girls were run over by U.S. Army vehicle, you know, and the beginning of the film, you remember how the monster is created. They dump all this formaldehyde in the drain and that's based on a real incident. A guy named Robert McFarland, who is a mortician working at the U.S. Army base in Yongsan. They had all this old formaldehyde, and he ordered, you know, one of his underlings to dump all of it in the drain, and it all went into the Han River. So, and he was never punished for that, and they just let him fly home, and the Korean courts actually convicted him, you know, but he didn't get punished, and that's because of the SOFA agreement, the Status Forces agreement between the Korea and the U.S. Army. So yeah, so there was a lot of anger against the U.S. at that time, you know. So, you know, he's kind of, Bong Joon-ho is channeling some of that into the movie. So, which is why some of the conservative critics, you know, they labeled it as an anti-American film, you know. So, and of course, you know, what's interesting about the film is not only the fact that there's this monster running around Seoul, but how the government in the film reacts to the crisis. You know, that's part of the story too, is that, you know, they rather than seeing it as this like I mean, they institute martial law. You know, it's like suddenly, you know, Korea is back in the 1970s, you know, under the, you know, in the time of Park Chung-hee, where, you know, you have a curfew, you know, the military is checking everybody and things like that. You're too young to remember this. I remember when I was a little boy, I visited Seoul and you know there was a curfew and there was like sirens and all these other things, and you know he's bringing that, you know, to to the film as well. So yeah. Okay, next.
Actually, the similar thing she talked. Also, I was impressed about the kind of weapons the family used at the end to rescue the daughter. The uncle used like fire, soju bottle with fire or something like that, which reminds me of how do you call it? 최루탄? Tear gas. So I remember it reminds many people of that 70s, like 80s civil rights movement. Yeah. So, and also, Duna used fire arrow. Also reminds archery. Something like that, which is very representative sports of Korea.
That's a symbol of you know every Summer Olympics. It's like, okay, where's Korea gonna get the gold medals? Archery, always.
But archery was the last weapon to rescue the daughter, so I think it's very anti-government. And also anti-American.
Yeah. So you know, I mean, and you know. Bong Joon-ho, he's too old to be part of that Sampayuk generation, you know, but you know he's definitely affected by that, you know, especially all the student demonstrations, you know. I mean, and he went to Yonsei when Yonsei was still very much a part of that. I don't know, these days it doesn't seem to be so much a part of the, you know, there aren't big student demonstrations, but you know, in the days when they all like centered around this campus, you know. So actually Park Chan-wook, I read it in an interview